The scream tore through the hangar before anyone saw what caused it. Two young girls, Simone and Sienna Blake, tumbled down the metal stairs, their hot chocolate cups spinning through the air before shattering on the ground. "What happened?" a mechanic shouted, frozen mid-step. Above them, a flight attendant's hand still hovered in disbelief, the echo of her shove ringing louder than the jet engines. For a single second, time stopped, then heels struck the floor in a sharp, furious rhythm. Dr. Naomi Blake, the girl's mother, and the woman who owned the airline, was running toward her daughters. And this time, silence would not save anyone. A quiet, practiced assumption that certain children didn't belong where they stood. And the woman who carried that assumption was about to learn what happens when a single look turns into an action that cannot be undone. Welcome back to Black and Bruised Stories. If you're new here, you've just joined a community dedicated to truth, justice, and survival. Show some love by clicking the like and subscribe button. Before we dive deeper into this story, drop a comment where you are watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, let me take you back to the calm, before the chaos, back to the hour before that sound took away the world's breath. It was a Tuesday morning, clear sky, the kind pilots call perfect weather. Inside the Skyux private hangar, everything gleamed. The jet's polished silver body reflected sunlight like water. And walking across the tarmac was a woman who moved with the precision of someone who built empires out of order. Her name was Dr. Naomi Blake. 45 years old, the quiet owner of Skylux Jets, a woman known for elegance, excellence, and an unshakable calm that had been earned the hard way. People said she never raised her voice. She didn't need to. When Naomi Blake looked at you, you either found your confidence or you found the exit. That morning, she was reviewing flight details with her operations manager. Her mind moved like a checklist. Fuel levels, pressure seals, route clearance. Everything needed to be exact. A few yards away, two girls were laughing. Her daughters, Simone and Sienna, 13-year-old, identical twins. The kind of twins you could tell apart only when you'd earned their trust. They moved together, mirrored in every motion. Same braids, same backpacks, same sparkle that still smelled like childhood. Naomi looked up from her notes. "Go on ahead," she told them, waving a hand. "I'll join you in a minute." They obeyed easily, not because they feared her, but because they admired her. And as they started toward the jet, she added softly, almost as an afterthought, "Remember, girls, the world doesn't always see who you are. Sometimes it only sees what it expects." It was gentle, motherly advice, and yet in a few minutes it would become prophecy. The twins giggled, not catching the weight in her tone. They skipped toward the jet stairs carrying paper cups of hot chocolate. They belonged there, but someone else didn't believe that. At the top of the stairs stood a young flight attendant, Carla Reed, mid-20s, new on this flight, though she'd been working 12-hour days all week. Uniform, perfect smile, thin exhaustion, humming just behind her professional posture. She wasn't cruel. She was tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being corrected. Tired of serving people who never remembered her name. And that morning, she told herself she would make sure everything ran her way. No mistakes, no disrespect. Not today. She spotted the twins walking up the metal steps. Two laughing girls in hoodies and sneakers, not dressed like passengers she was used to seeing. And before she even realized it, a thought slid across her mind. They must be in the wrong place. That one thought was all it took. Because bias rarely arrives wearing a label. Sometimes it's a reflex, a tightening of tone, a narrowing of patience, a voice that says, "Not here, not you." The girls approached with smiles polite enough to soften stone. "Hi," Simone began. "We're with Dr. Blake. She's right behind," but Carla cut her off, voice sharp. "Ma'am, this area is restricted. Step back, please." Sienna blinked, surprised by the sudden edge. "Oh, we're sorry. We just step back." Carla snapped again. Her words hit like a slap of cold air. She didn't want to hear explanations. She didn't care to listen to names, and she certainly wasn't interested in hearing who their mother was because at that moment she'd already decided who they weren't. The girls hesitated, confused, embarrassed. Simone took a small step forward to clarify, hands raised in politeness. Carla stepped forward too, trying to reassert control. Their movements collided. Carla's palm landing on Simone's shoulder, firmer than intended. 1/2 second. That's all it took. A heel slipped on metal. Sienna reached out to steady her sister. 2 gasps, 2 bodies losing balance. And then the sound, a sharp doubled crash. Skin against steel, breath against gravity. And the echo that followed spread through the hangar like an accusation. The sound of 2 people falling seized the air itself. It was quick. It was terrible. It was irreversible. For a single heartbeat, nothing moved. Not the crew, not the wind. Even the engines seemed to stop breathing. Carla's hand hovered mid-air, fingers frozen in the shape of regret. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She hadn't meant for this. She'd only wanted to control the moment, but the moment had controlled her instead. Simone and Sienna hit the ground hard, rolling against the bottom steps. They weren't broken, but they were shaken. Sienna's palm scraped. Simone's cup spilled across the tarmac, dark liquid staining the concrete. Small things, yet the humiliation felt enormous. They looked up, eyes wide. The attendant above them looked down, not with power now, but with horror. That single glance up and down became a mirror. 2 girls on the ground, 1 woman realizing what she'd just done. A fall made of flesh and gravity, but born from assumption and tone. And somewhere inside the hangar, another sound began. The steady click of heels coming closer. Because the woman those girls had tried to name, the one the attendant refused to hear about, was already on her way. If you want to hear what happens when that calm, powerful mother arrives, and how a single silence can change the world, make sure you subscribe right now. These are the stories we tell, so the truth never gets buried under noise. Before we move to the next part, tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone judge before they listened? What did that moment teach you? The sound came first, a crash sharp enough to cut the morning in half. Then a gasp, a clatter and silence so deep it swallowed the engines themselves. Naomi Blake's head turned before her mind understood what it had heard. Something inside her, the part that still remembered her daughter's first cries, recognized that sound. It was the sound of fear, and it belonged to her children. For a split second, she froze. Then everything in her body moved at once. The clipboard fell from her hand papers, scattering like startled birds. Her heels struck the concrete in uneven rhythm. Faster, faster, until the sound became a drumbeat of panic. People shouted behind her. Someone called her name, but she didn't hear. The world narrowed to the sight of 2 small figures crumpled at the base of the metal stairs. Her lungs burned before she even reached them. Every breath scraped raw against her throat. She could see uniforms rushing in from the edges of the hangar, the blur of safety vests, hands pointing, radios crackling. Someone yelled for first aid. Someone else froze, unsure what to do in the presence of the company's owner. Naomi didn't care. All she saw were her girls, still too still. She dropped to her knees beside them, the ground cold through her suit. Her hands hovered before she dared to touch them. Terrified that even comfort might cause more pain, Simone's eyes fluttered open, first dazed, her breath shallow. Sienna tried to speak, but only managed a whisper that broke in the middle. Their voices were small, frightened, but alive. Relief and terror collided inside Naomi's chest so violently that for a moment she couldn't breathe. She looked up, searching for the source of this nightmare, and found the young attendant standing halfway up the stairs, pale and shaking. Carla's hand was still out, as if she could pull time backward with it. Her mouth moved, forming a word Naomi didn't want to hear. Accident. The air in the hangar had changed. It carried static tension, disbelief. Technicians stood frozen by the fuel trucks. A pilot whispered into his headset. No one wanted to move until Naomi did. She brushed a strand of hair from Sienna's forehead, whispering the kind of sounds mothers make when words can't reach the fear. The twins trembled. Shock had turned their bodies heavy. their faces pale, their trusts shaken. Naomi felt something deep and ancient rise inside her. The instinct that protects, that warns, that corrects injustice without waiting for permission. She looked around, eyes sharp enough to stop conversation. "Where is the medic?" Someone shouted from the sidelines, and the answer came in hurried footsteps. Two responders appeared, kneeling beside the girls, their movements careful, deliberate, respectful. They checked pulses, offered water, and spoke softly. Naomi stayed close, her hand resting on her daughter's shoulders, grounding them, grounding herself. And while the responders worked, the silence around them thickened again, different this time, heavier with realization. Everyone could feel the story that would be told about this moment, the way it would travel beyond these walls. But for Naomi, there was no room for reputation or policy. There were only her children, and the truth that someone had looked at them and not seen them at all. Carla stood above, trembling so badly she gripped the railing to keep from collapsing. Her mind replayed the second she had dismissed the girls' voices. The gesture she'd made without thinking. The look on Naomi Blake's face now. The look that held no scream, only judgment, quiet enough to echo for years. When Naomi finally spoke, her voice was steady, but it carried a weight that made the air bow. No accusation, no profanity, no volume, just certainty. Her words were measured, each syllable a verdict. She told the responders to continue. She told the crew to pause all preparations, and she told no one to leave. Then she knelt again, whispering to her daughters, promising them that they were safe, that she was there. Her hands stayed on Sienna's chest until she could feel the rhythm of her breathing steady again. The medic handed Naomi a cloth to wipe her hands. She didn't notice that her own skin shook. The fabric came away stray with dust and the faintest trace of blood. It was a small human stain, but it meant everything. Around her, voices began to move again. Someone radioed the control tower. Someone brought water. Someone whispered that Dr. Blake was going to fire the entire crew. Naomi heard none of it. Her world was focused into 3 small circles of existence. Simone, Sienna, and the heartbeat inside her that was trying to steady itself. When she finally rose, she turned slowly, eyes, finding the young attendant who couldn't look away. Carla's uniform was still neat, but the confidence had drained from her completely. She stood there as if waiting for permission to breathe. Naomi didn't speak to her yet. There would be time for that, time for truth, time for consequences. For now, she simply looked at her daughters again, alive, shaken, still clinging to each other, and knew this was the kind of moment that changed the air between people forever. The responders lifted the girls carefully onto portable seats, ready to escort them to the medical room near the hangar office. As they passed, Naomi walked beside them, matching her stride to theirs, her hand never leaving Sienna's. Every eye followed her. The woman who ran this company, who had built it from nothing, was now simply a mother walking with her children out of a storm that never should have happened. Behind them, the hangar remained silent, except for the hum of lights and the echo of what everyone had just witnessed. Carla sank onto the bottom step, the sound of Naomi's heels fading into the distance, like a sentence being written. For the first time since she joined the airline, she wished someone would tell her what to do. No one did. The echo of that fall would live in that building long after the stain was scrubbed away. A reminder that one careless moment can bring an empire to its knees. And though Naomi Blake had run to save her daughters, the truth was that the whole company was about to be forced to run toward accountability, toward reflection, toward change. Because once a sound like that rings through the air, it never really stops. It just keeps echoing, waiting for someone brave enough to listen. But the silence wasn't empty. It was full of consequences, rushing toward them like a gathering storm. In the distance, phones began to buzz. A passenger from the adjacent hangar had captured everything on video. The confrontation, the fall, the aftermath. Within minutes, the footage was uploaded to social media platforms tagged with location markers that would soon draw reporters like moths to flame. Christopher Webb, the ground supervisor who'd rushed to help the girls, was already on his radio to airport security. "We have an incident involving injured miners at Skylux Terminal 7. Medical responded, but we're going to need incident reports, witness statements, and probably legal notifications." The response crackled back. "Copy that, Christopher. Child Protective Services protocol is in effect. Nobody leaves until we have statements." Carla's legs finally gave out. She sank onto the metal step, her uniform still pristine except for the tremor in her hands. Around her, other crew members were stepping back literally and figuratively, distancing themselves from someone whose career had just ended in the worst possible way. "Jesus, Carla," whispered Jake Morrison, the co-pilot, who'd watched everything unfold. "What were you thinking? Those are just kids." But Carla couldn't answer, because she was beginning to understand that thinking hadn't been involved at all. Only assumption, only bias dressed up as authority, only the kind of blindness that turns children into threats simply because they exist in spaces where adults don't expect to see them. The stain on the concrete dark chocolate spreading across grey would be scrubbed away within the hour. But the stain on Carla's conscience would prove much harder to clean. If you believe no parent should ever have to run toward that kind of fear, make sure you subscribe right now. The next act will show what happens when calm authority meets guilt and silence face to face. When everything goes wrong in front of you, what do you notice first? The noise or the silence that follows? Tell me in the comments. The hangar emptied one heartbeat at a time. Engines silenced. Orders faded into whispers. And yet the sound that mattered most still lingered. The sound that had torn through the morning and refused to die. Naomi Blake walked beside her daughters as the medical team guided them to the lounge room behind the glass doors. Each step felt heavier than the last. Inside that office smell of antiseptic and coffee, the twins sat on padded chairs while attendants checked them carefully. Voices soft and professional. Sienna's ankle was wrapped. Simone's arm supported. The twins kept glancing toward their mother, as if to confirm she was real, that the world hadn't split entirely apart. Naomi's face never lost its calm, but her fingers fidgeted against the edge of her jacket, a tremor she wouldn't allow anyone to see. The medic gave her the report. Bruised, shaken, nothing broken. The kind of relief that still hurts. She thanked them, but her voice came from somewhere deep and cold. Behind the glass, the rest of the crew stood waiting. Carla Reed lingered near the stairway, half hidden behind the frame of the jet door. Her reflection shimmered on the surface of the fuselage, a distorted image of neat uniform and pale fear. She couldn't stop looking at it. It was like seeing a stranger wearing her skin. She thought about the shove, about the girl's startled eyes, about the way her hand had acted before her mind caught up. She wanted to believe she hadn't meant it. But another truth whispered louder. She hadn't cared enough to pause. That was its own kind of intent. Naomi stepped out of the lounge a few minutes later. Her daughters were safe for now. That was enough. She stood for a long moment in the center of the hangar, taking in the quiet, the crew, the polished floor where the stain had already been scrubbed. And then she looked up right at the young woman who had changed everything. The moment their eyes met, Carla's breath stopped. She could feel her heartbeat everywhere. Throat, wrists, ears, Naomi's voice didn't need to rise. It carried through the stillness like a verdict. "Do you understand what you did?" Carla wanted to answer, but words tangled in her mouth. Her voice betrayed her. "I didn't. I never meant." Naomi's head tilted slightly, the smallest movement, but it was enough to silence every excuse. "You didn't listen," she said. "You didn't ask who they were. And because you didn't listen, you turned my children into proof of your impatience." The words didn't sound angry. They sounded tired, ancient, factual. Carla looked down at the floor, and in the reflection of her shoes, she saw the small, cracked mirror of spilled liquid still glimmering. Her voice broke. "I'm sorry." Naomi took a slow breath. "You'll be sore when you understand why you did it." The hangar remained quiet. Even the co-pilot kept his head bowed. Naomi turned away from Carla and looked toward the jet, her company's pride. How many times had she told her staff that safety was built on respect? And yet, here they were standing in a place polished by her money, but stained by someone else's blindness. She remembered something her husband once said when the business was young. When people work for you, they don't just represent your name, they represent what you tolerate. Those words returned, now sharp and merciless. She spoke again, this time to everyone. I built this company so no one would ever be made small on my watch. But today, smallness came from within these walls. That means the work starts here. Her eyes swept the room, lingering on Carla. I will not destroy you, Miss Reed, she said quietly, but I will require that you look at yourself long enough to see what I see right now. The silence after that was a silence that changed people. It wasn't angry. It was reflective, like light bending on metal. Carla nodded the motion, small but final. She knew that whatever came next would be a lifetime of trying to unlearn the moment that brought her here. Naomi walked back to the glass door where her daughters waited. Simone reached out a hand. Naomi took it, holding tight, guiding them out together. As they crossed the threshold, the crew parted again. Not from duty this time, but from awe. Behind them, Carla turned once more to the jet's body. Her own reflection stared back, hair disheveled eyes, red lips pale. She reached up as if to touch the surface, but her fingers stopped an inch short. The mirror shimmered. Her reflection wavered, and that was when she realized she wasn't looking at a surface anymore. She was looking at herself. The mirror cracked, not with sound, but with truth. That truth was simple. She hadn't seen the children because she hadn't believed they belonged. And now, she would never again walk up a set of stairs without remembering the sound of a mother's footsteps running toward what she loved most in the world. Naomi's heels clicked softly across the hangar floor, each step steady, now her daughters beside her. The echo of their movement filled the space that had once been silence, transforming it into rhythm again. Order had returned, but it was a different kind of order. An order built on lesson rather than fear. Outside, sunlight poured through the open hangar doors, spreading across the polished floor until even the shadows looked new. Naomi paused at the edge of that light, turned slightly, and looked back just once. Her gaze didn't hold anger anymore, only clarity. Then she stepped forward, leading her daughters into the morning. Inside, Carla sank onto the bottom step, where it had all begun. She pressed her palms together, the metal cold beneath her, and whispered into the emptiness, I will learn. The words were small, but they were honest. And sometimes honesty is the first sound after the silence of denial. The mirror had cracked, but it hadn't shattered. That meant it could still be mended. But mending would require more than wishful thinking. It would require facing truths that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. 20 minutes after Naomi left with her daughters, Sarah Chin approached Carla with the kind of careful steps people use around broken things. Carla, I need you to come inside. There are some calls you need to be aware of. Inside the operations office, the phone lines were lighting up like a Christmas tree. Every extension buzzed with the sound of crisis. Reporters seeking comment, lawyers asking questions, executives demanding explanations. Channel 5 News wants a statement, Sarah said quietly. TMZ is offering money for interviews, and she hesitated. The FBI has been contacted, Civil Rights Division. Each word hit Carla like a physical blow. FBI, Civil Rights, Federal Investigation. She'd pushed 2 children down some stairs, and now the full weight of the justice system was turning its attention her way. How is this federal? Carla whispered. Sarah's expression was grim but patient. When you assault children because of their race while wearing a uniform, it becomes a civil rights violation. When it happens at an airport, it becomes federal jurisdiction. And when it's caught on video, she gestured toward her computer screen where the footage was already racking up views in the thousands. Carla Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. Dr. Blake isn't just any passenger. She has contracts with the federal government. She serves on aviation committees. She has influence in places that matter. And you just gave her daughters a reason to use every bit of that influence. The reality was sinking in now, settling into Carla's bones like winter cold. This wasn't just about losing a job or facing discipline. This was about the possibility of criminal charges, federal prosecution, prison time. This was about her children watching their mother on the news being led away in handcuffs because she couldn't see past her own biases long enough to treat two kids with basic human dignity. She thought about her own teenagers at home. Christopher, 15, who got followed around stores by security guards, and Isabella, 13, who'd started asking why teachers always seemed surprised when she got good grades. How would she explain to them that she'd become the kind of adult they'd been taught to fear? "I need to call my lawyer," she said finally. "You need to call your family first," Sarah replied. "The news vans are already headed this way." Through the office window, Carla could see the first television truck pulling into the parking lot, a satellite dish extending toward the sky like an antenna for broadcasting shame. Soon there would be cameras, reporters with microphones, questions she couldn't answer because there was no good answer to why did you push those children. The mirror hadn't just cracked, it was beginning to shatter, and each piece reflected a different angle of the same ugly truth. If you believe real strength isn't about revenge but about reflection, make sure you subscribe right now. The next act will show how a broken moment can be rebuilt into grace. When you've made a mistake that hurt someone, what helped you face yourself again, their forgiveness, or your own reflection? Share your thoughts below. 3 hours after the fall, the world outside the hangar had caught fire. Not with flames, but with something more dangerous. Truth spreading at the speed of light. Every phone in America seemed to be buzzing with the same videos, the same hashtags, the same questions that nobody wanted to answer, but everybody needed to ask. Inside the crisis management room at United Airlines headquarters, Jennifer Park stared at screens that painted a picture of a corporate nightmare in real time. A jet stare incident was trending #1 globally. The video, shot from 3 different angles by passengers who'd witnessed everything, had been viewed over 2 million times in the past hour alone. But it wasn't just the numbers that terrified her. It was the voices. Celebrities were sharing the footage with captions like, "This is what hate looks like," and "Those babies deserved better." Politicians were calling for congressional hearings. Civil rights lawyers were appearing on news programs using words like assault, federal investigation, and criminal charges. "How bad is it?" asked Michael Chin, United CEO, as he burst through the conference room doors. His tie was crooked, his usually perfect hair disheveled, the look of a man who'd been pulled from a board meeting to face the crisis of his career. Jennifer turned her laptop toward him. The screen showed a live stream from outside the Skylux hangar, where news vans were already gathering like vultures. Reporters were setting up cameras, adjusting microphones, preparing to tell a story that would echo long after the cameras stopped rolling. "Sir," she said quietly, "we're not just looking at a public relations crisis. The FBI has been contacted. There's talk of federal civil rights violations." And she hesitated. "Dr. Naomi Blake isn't just any passenger. I know who she is." Michael snapped, then caught himself. Stress was making him sharp, but sharpness wouldn't solve this. She is one of the most influential figures in private aviation. She sits on federal advisory committees. She has contracts worth hundreds of millions with the Department of Transportation. Jennifer nodded grimly. "And our employee just assaulted her children on camera." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael sank into a chair, the weight of corporate destruction settling on his shoulders. In 30 years of business, he'd navigated strikes, crashes, economic downturns, even pandemic shutdowns. But he'd never faced anything like this. The complete moral collapse of everything his company claimed to represent. "What do we know about the employee?" he asked. "Carla Reed. 8 years with the company. Generally good reviews, though there have been some concerns about her interactions with passengers who don't fit typical demographics." Jennifer pulled up Carla's file on her tablet. 3 complaints in the past 2 years, all involving families of color, all dismissed as misunderstandings. Michael's stomach dropped, a pattern that meant this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of something deeper, something systemic that his company had ignored, until it exploded in the worst possible way. "Jesus," he whispered, "we've been sitting on a bomb." Meanwhile, in a different kind of crisis room, this one inside FBI headquarters in Atlanta, Agent Patricia Williams was reviewing the same footage with a team of federal investigators. The Criminal Civil Rights Division didn't take cases lightly, but when 2 children were assaulted on camera while adults stood by and watched, the law was clear. This meets the threshold for federal prosecution, Agent Williams told her supervisor, Special Agent David Torres. Assault under color of law, civil rights violations, potential conspiracy, if we can prove the airline had knowledge of patterns they failed to address. Torres nodded, his expression grim. What do we know about the family? Dr. Naomi Blake is clean, more than clean. She's a federal contractor, serves on aviation safety committees, and has security clearance for government work. The children are honor students, no disciplinary issues, active in community service. Agent Williams paused. "Sir, these aren't just any kids. They're exactly the kind of kids who should never have to experience something like this." "No kid should have to experience this," Torres corrected quietly. "But you're right. This case is going to have visibility, congressional oversight, media scrutiny, everything. We need to be flawless." Back at the hangar, Naomi Blake was facing her own kind of reckoning. The twins were resting in her office now, Simone reading a book, while Sienna dozed in the leather chair by the window. They looked peaceful, but Naomi could see the new tension in their shoulders. The way their eyes tracked movement differently than they had that morning. Her daughters had lost something today that she could never give back. The assumption that adults would treat them fairly. The innocence that came from believing the world was just. The trust that came from never having been pushed downstairs because of the color of their skin. Her phone buzzed constantly. Reporters, lawyers, government officials, other business leaders expressing shock and support. But she wasn't ready to talk to any of them yet. First, she needed to understand exactly what kind of justice would heal this wound for her daughters and for every other child who might face something similar. Sarah Chin knocked softly on the office door. "Dr. Blake, there's someone here to see you." FBI agent Patricia Williams. Naomi looked up from her daughters to find a woman in a crisp navy suit standing in her doorway. Professional, serious, but with kind eyes that suggested she understood the gravity of what had happened here. Dr. Blake, Agent Williams, said quietly, "I'm here about the incident involving your daughters. We need to talk." Naomi nodded, glancing at the twins. Simone looked up from her book with the sharp intelligence that made her mother proud and worried in equal measure. "Is the lady going to jail?" Simone asked directly. Agent Williams met the 13-year-old's gaze with the respect she deserved. "That depends on what our investigation finds. But I can tell you this. What happened to you and your sister was wrong. It was illegal, and there will be consequences." Sienna opened her eyes at the sound of voices. "Good," she said softly. "Other kids shouldn't get hurt like we did." The simple moral clarity in their voices cut through every adult complexity in the room. This wasn't about revenge or punishment. It was about justice, about making sure that what happened to them didn't happen to anyone else. Agent Williams pulled out a chair and sat down, making herself at their level. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" In your own words, for the next hour, the twins recounted the morning with the precision that came from trauma etched clearly in memory. They described Carla's tone, her refusal to listen, the moment when professional authority became personal violence. They spoke without anger, but with a clarity that would later prove devastating in court. As they talked, Naomi watched her daughters transform from victims into witnesses, from children into advocates for justice. It was both heartbreaking and inspiring the way resilience could emerge from tragedy when it was supported by love and the promise of accountability. When the FBI interview was finished, Agent Williams stood to leave. "Dr. Blake," she said quietly, "I want you to know this case is a priority. Federal resources, full investigation, whatever it takes. Your daughters deserved better, and we're going to make sure the system responds appropriately." after the agent left the twins curled up on either side of their mother on the office couch. They'd been through something terrible, but they weren't broken. They were changed, older in some ways, but still themselves. Mom Sienna said softly, "Are you proud of us?" The question caught Naomi off guard. "Proud of you, baby." "Why would you ask that?" "Because we didn't fight back," Simone explained. "We didn't yell or call her names or anything. We just tried to tell her the truth." Naomi felt tears threatening for the first time that day. Not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride in these two girls who'd faced hatred with dignity and emerged with their hearts intact. "I am so proud of you," she whispered, pulling them closer. "You showed more grace and strength in those moments than most adults show in their entire lives. You are extraordinary." They sat together as the afternoon light slanted through the office windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Outside, the media storm was building. The legal machinery was grinding into motion, and the corporate accountability process was beginning. But inside this quiet moment, there was just a mother and her daughters holding each other after surviving something that should never have happened, preparing to face whatever came next with the same courage they'd shown on a set of aircraft stairs that morning. The reckoning was just beginning, but they would face it together, while the Blake family sat in quiet dignity in Dr. Blake's office. The world outside was exploding with a fury that surprised even seasoned crisis management professionals. In newsrooms across the country, assignment editors were pulling reporters from other stories to cover what was rapidly becoming the defining civil rights moment of the year. The video-cleared, devastating, undeniable had everything that made stories go viral. Innocent children, obvious injustice, dramatic consequences, and a resolution that was still unfolding in real time. At CNN headquarters in Atlanta, anchor Anderson Cooper was reviewing the footage with his production team. "This isn't just a story about one bad employee," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd covered civil rights stories for decades. "This is about how bias becomes violence when it's wrapped in authority. We're going to live at the top of the hour." The same conversation was happening at MSNBC, Fox News, BBC World Service, and dozens of local stations. By evening, the incident would be leading newscasts around the globe, sparking conversations about American racism in languages the Blake family didn't even speak. But it was social media where the story truly caught fire. Jared Jetster incident had been joined by Justice Forum in Siena, Shush, Aviation Wall Black, and Children Deserve Better. The video was being shared not just by random users, but by verified accounts with millions of followers, celebrities, politicians, civil rights leaders, and ordinary parents who saw their own children in those two girls lying on cold concrete. Oprah Winfrey posted the video with a caption that would be quoted in newspapers for weeks. "These beautiful children were hurt for no reason, except the color of their skin." When we say, "see something, say something," we mean this. When bias becomes violence, silence becomes complicity. LeBron James, Viola Davis, John Legend, and dozens of other celebrities amplified the story to their combined audiences of hundreds of millions. Politicians from both parties issued statements condemning the incident and calling for investigations. Civil rights organizations that usually disagreed on strategy were united in their outrage and demand for accountability. Back at United Airlines headquarters, the crisis management team was discovering that there are some stories too big and too clear for traditional damage control strategies to contain. "The stock is down 12%, reported CFO Patricia Williams, staring at her Bloomberg terminal in disbelief. 12% in 4 hours. I've never seen anything like it. It's not just the stock, added Chief Legal Counsel David Park. We're getting calls from the Justice Department, the Transportation Department, and congressional offices. Everyone wants to know what we're going to do about this." Michael Chen, the CEO who'd started the day worried about quarterly earnings, was now facing questions about whether his company would survive intact. "What are our options legally?" David consulted his notes. "We can try to claim that Carla was acting outside the scope of her employment, but that's going to be tough given that she was in uniform and controlling access to an aircraft. We can argue that she wasn't properly trained, but that opens us up to negligence claims. I don't want legal strategies, Michael interrupted. I want to know how we make this right. Those are kids. Somebody hurt kids while representing our company. How do we fix that? The room fell silent. In 30 years of airline crisis management, they'd dealt with mechanical failures, weather disasters, labor strikes, even terrorism, but they'd never faced the simple moral clarity of watching their employee assault children for no reason except racial bias. Sir Jennifer Park said quietly, I think we need to consider that this might not be fixable. Not in the traditional sense. The video is too clear. The injustice is too obvious, and the family is too sympathetic. We might need to focus on taking accountability rather than limiting damage. Meanwhile, at the FBI field office in Atlanta, a different kind of crisis response was unfolding. Special Agent David Torres was assembling a team for what was already being classified as a high-priority civil rights investigation. This is going to be fast-tracked, he told his team of investigators. Full resources, federal prosecution track, maximum visibility. The Attorney General's office is already asking for updates. Agent Patricia Williams, who'd been assigned as lead investigator, had spent the afternoon reviewing not just the assault video, but United Airlines employment records, training materials, and complaint histories. What she'd found painted a disturbing picture of systemic problems that went far beyond one employee's bad day. Carla Reed has had 3 formal complaints about discriminatory treatment of passengers in the past 2 years. She reported to the team all were dismissed by United as misunderstandings or communication issues. No additional training, no discipline, no intervention. So the company knew she had problems with bias. Torres asked they knew passengers were complaining. Whether they understood it as bias or just bad customer service is something we'll need to determine, but there's definitely a pattern of the company ignoring red flags. The investigation would eventually expand beyond Carla to examine United's entire training and oversight system, their response to discrimination complaints, and their corporate culture around diversity and inclusion. By the time it was finished, dozens of employees would be interviewed, thousands of documents would be reviewed, and the entire aviation industry would be forced to confront uncomfortable questions about how bias was allowed to flourish in professional settings. But that night, as Carla Reed sat in her apartment staring at her phone's constant notifications, the future consequences felt abstract compared to the immediate reality of her life falling apart in real time. Her own teenage children were seeing their mother's face on social media attached to words like racist, child abuser, and criminal. Her neighbors were texting with questions she couldn't answer. Her mother was calling every hour, alternating between support and bewilderment. I don't understand, her 15-year-old son Christopher had said when he got home from school and saw the news coverage. You pushed kids, Mom. You always told us to stick up for little kids. That conversation had broken something fundamental inside her. Looking into her son's eyes, brown eyes that looked just like Simone and Sienna Blake's, she'd finally understood what she'd really done that morning. She hadn't just pushed 2 children because of their race. She'd become the kind of adult that her own children had been taught to fear and distrust. The reckoning was no longer something happening to other people in other places. It had come home, and it was demanding answers she didn't have, and forgiveness she wasn't sure she deserved. The sound of those children falling was echoing now through her own home, her own family, her own life. And for the first time since that terrible Tuesday morning, Carla Reed began to understand that some actions create consequences that can never be undone. If you believe children deserve justice when adults fail, then hit that subscribe button right now. The next act will show what happens when the full weight of the law meets the simple truth spoken by 13-year-old girls. When you see injustice captured on video, do you think social media makes accountability more likely or just makes punishment more severe? Let me know in the comments, because what happens next will show us how both truth and justice travel in the digital age. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Atlanta had become the center of a story that stretched far beyond 2 girls and a set of aircraft stairs. The case of United States versus Carla Reed had attracted national attention, not just for what it represented, but for what it demanded a reckoning with how bias turns into violence and how justice can transform tragedy into protection for others. Judge Patricia Morrison called the courtroom to order, her voice carrying the weight of someone who understood that some cases change more than just the people involved. The gallery was packed. Reporters, civil rights advocates, aviation industry, executives, and families who traveled from across the country to witness accountability in action. At the defendant's table, Carla Reed sat with her attorney, looking nothing like the confident flight attendant who'd stood at the top of those stairs 6 months earlier. The intervening time had aged her carved lines of regret and reflection into her face. She'd lost 30 lb. Her hair had started graying at the temples, and her eyes held the hollow look of someone who'd been forced to confront the worst version of themselves. The prosecution's case had been methodical and devastating. Federal prosecutors had presented not just the video evidence of the assault, but a pattern of discriminatory behavior that United Airlines had ignored for years. 3 other families had come forward with similar stories. Black passengers questioned about their right to be in first-class seats. Hispanic children separated from their families for verification of relationships. Asian passengers subjected to additional security screenings without cause. But it was the testimony of Simone and Sienna Blake that had broken the case wide open. The twins, now 14 and more poised than most adults, had taken the witness stand with a dignity that silenced even the most hardened observers. They'd recounted their experience without anger or embellishment, their voices clear and strong as they described exactly what had happened and how it had changed them. She didn't push us because she was mean. Sienna had testified her words, carrying a wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. She pushed us because she looked at us and didn't see kids who belong there. She saw problems to be solved. Simone had added her own devastating clarity. We told her the truth about who we were, and she decided we were lying because of how we looked. That's not just wrong. It's dangerous for every kid who doesn't look like what adults expect. Their testimony had lasted 2 hours, but the impact had been immediate and lasting. Grown adults wept openly in the courtroom. Journalists struggled to maintain professional composure, and Carla Reed had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with the weight of understanding what her assumptions had caused. The defense had tried to argue that Carla's actions were the result of stress-poor training and institutional failures rather than personal malice. Her attorney painted her as a victim of systemic problems, a working mother who'd made a terrible mistake under pressure. But the prosecution's response had been swift and unforgiving. Assistant U.S. Attorney Christopher Johnson had stood before the jury and delivered a closing argument that would be quoted in law schools for years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, he'd said, the defendant wants you to believe that bias is just a mistake, that assumptions are just misunderstandings, that violence is just an accident. But those children lying on cold concrete tell a different story. They tell us that bias becomes assault when we stop listening. They tell us that assumptions become violence when we refuse to see the humanity in people who don't look like us. He gestured toward the Blake family, sitting quietly in the front row. Doctor, Blake and her daughters didn't ask to become symbols of injustice. They were just trying to board an airplane. But Carla Reed turned their Tuesday morning into a federal case because she couldn't imagine that black children belonged in the space she controlled. The jury had deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: assault under color of law violation of federal civil rights and conspiracy to deprive civil rights. The speed of their decision spoke to the clarity of the evidence and the power of truth, told simply by children who'd been failed by adults. Now, as Judge Morrison prepared to deliver Carla's sentence, the courtroom held its collective breath. Federal sentencing guidelines for civil rights violations were serious. Potential prison time, substantial fines, and permanent loss of the rights and privileges that came with citizenship. Ms. Reed, Judge Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of 3 decades on the bench. You have been convicted of using your position of authority to deprive 2 children of their civil rights through physical violence. The court has reviewed your background, your expressions of remorse, and the impact statements from the victims and their family. Carla stood, her legs shaking slightly as she faced the judge, who would determine her future. The assault of children based on racial bias strikes at the very heart of what our justice system exists to prevent. Judge Morrison continued, "When adults in positions of trust use violence against children, because of the color of their skin, they don't just harm those individual children, they wound the fabric of civil society itself." She paused, glancing at the Blake family before returning her attention to Carla. However, the court also notes that justice must be both punitive and restorative. The goal is not merely to punish wrongdoing, but to prevent future harm and to heal the damage that has been done. Judge Morrison announced Carla's sentence 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release, 500 hours of community service, working with civil rights organizations, and permanent prohibition from employment in transportation industries. But it was the judge's final words that would echo long after the courtroom emptied. "Ms. Reed, you will serve this sentence not just as punishment for what you did, but as a message to every person in a position of authority over others. Children, all children deserve to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. When you failed to see the humanity in Simone and Sienna Blake, you failed at the most basic requirement of adult responsibility." As Carla was led away in handcuffs, her shoulders shaking with sobs, the Blake family remained composed in their front row seats. Dr. Naomi Blake had her arms around her daughters, but her face showed no satisfaction in watching someone else's destruction. Only the quiet relief of justice served. Outside the courthouse, the media scrum was intense but respectful. Reporters had covered this case for months, and they understood they were witnessing something larger than a single criminal trial. Dr. Blake stepped up to the cluster of microphones with the same poise she'd shown that morning in the hangar. "Today's verdict sends a clear message," she said, her voice carrying across the courthouse steps. "Adults who use their authority to harm children based on racial bias will face serious consequences. But more importantly, it tells every child watching that their dignity matters, their voices will be heard, and their rights will be protected." Simone and Sienna flanked their mother, no longer the shaken 13-year-olds who'd fallen down aircraft stairs, but confident young women who'd helped transform personal trauma into societal progress. "We hope Ms. Reed learns from this experience," Sienna said, when a reporter asked about the prison sentence. "We hope she uses her time to understand why what she did was wrong, and we hope she finds a way to make sure other kids never go through what we went through." Simone added her own perspective with characteristic directness. "This isn't about revenge. It's about making sure that when kids tell adults the truth, they get believed. It's about making sure that every child feels safe in public spaces, no matter what they look like or who their parents are." The impact of the Blake case extended far beyond the courtroom. United Airlines had settled the civil lawsuit for an undisclosed amount, but the real cost had been an institutional transformation. The company had implemented comprehensive bias training for all employees, created oversight positions for civil rights compliance, and established a victim compensation fund for passengers who experienced discrimination. More significantly, the Federal Aviation Administration had issued new regulations requiring bias training for all airline employees, with regular auditing and serious penalties for companies that failed to maintain inclusive environments. The Blake protocols had become industry standard, protecting millions of passengers from the kind of treatment the twins had experienced. The case had also sparked a national conversation about how children, particularly children of color, were treated in professional settings. School districts had revised discipline policies. Healthcare systems had implemented child advocacy programs, and retail companies had trained employees to recognize and interrupt bias-based assumptions about young customers. But perhaps the most lasting impact was on children themselves. Across the country, young people had watched Simone and Sienna Blake stand up for themselves with dignity and courage, and they'd found their own voices to challenge unfair treatment. Teachers reported students speaking up about discriminatory behavior. Child advocacy organizations saw increased reporting of bias incidents. The message that children's voices mattered and deserved respect had resonated far beyond aviation settings. As the Blake family left the courthouse that day, they walked past a small group of children and parents who traveled to witness the verdict. The kids held signs with messages like, "Thank you for being brave," and "You made us all safer." One little girl, no more than 8 years old, approached Simone and Sienna with wide eyes and a shy smile. "Are you the girl who made the mean lady go to jail?" she asked. Sienna knelt down to the child's level. "We're the girls who told the truth when an adult treated us badly," she said gently. "And because we told the truth, other kids are safer now." The little girl nodded seriously. "My mom says, if anyone treats me badly because I'm black, I should tell the truth like you did." "That's right," Simone said, joining her sister at the child's eye level. "And remember, you belong everywhere your mama says you belong. Don't let anyone tell you differently." As they walked to their car, Dr. Blake reflected on the journey from that terrible Tuesday morning to this moment of justice served. Her daughters had lost some innocence that day on the aircraft stairs, but they'd gained something else. The knowledge that their voices had power, that their dignity had value, and that standing up for what's right could create change that protected others. The sound that had echoed through that hangar 6 months earlier, the sound of 2 children falling, had transformed into something else entirely. It had become the sound of justice rising, of systems changing, of other children being protected from similar harm. That evening, as the Blake family sat around their dinner table, the twins shared stories from school, talked about their plans for college, and debated the merits of different airplane designs with the passion that had always defined them. They were still the same girls who'd walked up those aircraft stairs that morning, curious, confident, and unashamed of belonging in spaces where they deserved to be. But they were also something more now. They were young women who'd faced hatred with grace, who'd transformed trauma into advocacy, and who'd proven that truth spoken by children could indeed change the world. The echo of their fall had become the sound of justice. And that sound would continue to reverberate long after the news cameras moved on to other stories, because some voices once heard can never be silenced, and some truths once spoken can never be forgotten. If this story reminded you that every voice matters and every child deserves justice, make sure you're subscribed to this channel. We tell these stories so the truth never gets buried under silence. What do you think was the most important lesson from Simone and Sienna's courage? That children should speak up for themselves, or that adults should listen better? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, in a world that sometimes tells children they don't belong, be the adult who sees them, hears them, and makes sure they know their dignity matters. Because every child deserves to climb stairs without falling, and every voice deserves to be heard when it speaks the truth.